Our speaker this hour is Brother Skip Francis. The lesson that he has, back to biblical morality, goes well with the two lessons last night. He and his wife Kay have 6 children, and appreciate Brian for his willingness to help out. He's done an excellent job, and we appreciate that. Skip preaches for the Grant Street congregation, and he's liberal. He's in liberal Kansas. He's also an instructor in the Truth Bible Institute. He is one who will stand for the truth. We appreciate him for the work that he does, and know that he's going to present an excellent lesson dealing with this great subject on biblical morality. And I'm even going to let him use the big pulpit over there.
I guess as I begin this morning, I want to, and I hope I don't embarrass my son in bringing this up, but he showed something that demonstrates a really great point. And that's that even with preachers, you have to study behind them because they can make a mistake too. It always does best to go back to the book, back to the Bible. That's what we're talking about. When I was thinking about this subject matter and trying to figure out what direction I was going to go with it, I was also in the process of preparing a sermon on the topic of Jeroboam as he led the nation of Israel astray. And I began to notice a great deal of similarities there between some of the things that we see today. When Jeroboam created the 2 golden calves to put on Dan and Bethel, he changed the object of worship. Then he created a priesthood and changed the priesthood. He changed the feast day. He changed the day of worship. And in doing all those things, one of the things that stood out about Jeroboam was the fact that the Bible tells us that he caused Israel to sin. You know, Jeroboam became what we would call a good bad example, because subsequent generations as kings arose, his name was brought up by comparison. We remember Omri and Ahab in particular, and all the damage that they did to the nation of Israel as they caused Israel to sin. By comparison, we look at King Asa or Hezekiah, and the fact that under their leadership, that they were able to develop Israel to be closer to God once again, going through those hills and valleys that Israel was virtually famous for. In thinking about those issues, I began to realize that a great deal of what we're seeing today in our society, in our country, is brought about by the problem of inappropriate and immoral leadership. Brethren, I'm ashamed of my country for the various things that we see continuing to happen today. Would that the President, as he's visiting the beaches, would stop in here this morning and be instructed by these lessons. Back to Bible morality. I wanted to begin this morning by telling you a little bit about myself. Some of you know. I am extremely patriotic. I'm a big fan, if you will, of our constitutional republic. Unfortunately, many are changing, or attempting to change it from a constitutional republic. And as like Ben Franklin said many years ago when I asked that question, He said, when he was asked about what kind of government that we were going to have, and he said, a constitutional republic, if you can keep it. I am the son of a career military man, 25 years in the Air Force. My father-in-law was a career military man, 25 years in the Air Force. My uncle went to Italy and fought in World War II. I spent 21 years in the Air Force. I have a niece and a nephew that both have spent a year in Iraq. And a young son that's getting ready to join the Marine Corps. I'm very proud of him for that. We want God to bless America, but not for sin. Do we talk about our country in the appropriate way? Is it my country, right or wrong? As I said, I love this country. My family has helped to fill they call them the quotas, if you will, of 3 of the military services. I put nearly 60 years up there, but then I realized my math was definitely off because there's 71 years just between my father, my father-in-law, and me. When you start adding all the others together, it's going to get close to 100 years of service to the country. And many of you have also given service. There are times when patriotism is easy. We just went through Flag Day. I kind of found it interesting that on Flag Day, I started looking for ties. And I always observe what men wear and neckwear because I've got a fairly good collection of ties. I didn't see one flag that day. The times when patriotism is easy are days like Independence Day, Memorial Day, or maybe watching a patriotic movie or a parade. What happens when the going gets tough? As we look at these images, we're reminded of a time when it got tough. We need to take a look at these issues and see the level of importance that they should be. It's important for our country that we be concerned about our country. But there are greater concerns than these. It was pointed out, I believe it was yesterday, by one of the speakers, that there are greater concerns than sometimes the physical things that we are concerned about. For instance, the oil spill. It's a problem, absolutely. It's something that needs to be resolved, no question. But is it as important as the souls of so many that will not make it to heaven? How did you react when you saw the towers fall? Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was a terrorist act? What was our response? Well, we cried for the lost souls. We prayed for our country. It was one of the few times in our nation's recent history that so many got together in prayer, including many of our leaders. We prepared for the war that was to come. We supported our leaders in punishing the evildoer and doing right. We went to war against evil. Romans chapter 13, verse 3 and 4 says, "For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." But my concern today is not that physical terrorism, but the spiritual terrorism that has arisen from within this nation. How do we respond? Psalm 33, verse 12 says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his inheritance." Proverbs 14, verse 34 and 35. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. The king's favor is toward a wise servant, but his wrath is against him that causeth shame. Isaiah 1:4 reads, "A sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters. They have forsaken the Lord, they have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger. They are gone away backward." What about spiritual terrorism? Any act that destroys our relationship with God is moral and spiritual terrorism. Hebrews 5:14 puts the burden on us. "But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." And brethren, we live in a day when our nation calls good evil and evil good. What does God hate as we discern between good and evil? It's our responsibility to know what God hates. Proverbs chapter 6, beginning in verse 16, "These things doth the Lord hate, yea, 7 are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, and heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren." We'll begin by talking about what the Bible means by a proud look, and see if we have that issue to deal with today. How about that statement we like so much to talk about, one nation under God? We make it with pride whenever we say the Pledge of Allegiance, but how true is it? Is there a Bible example of a similar situation? Yes, there is. Jeremiah chapter 7, beginning in verse 4. The prophet writes, "Trust ye not in lying words, saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these." How different is it from being prideful of the temple of the Lord being in your city and being prideful of being one nation under God? "For if ye thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if ye thoroughly execute judgment between a man and his neighbor, if ye oppress not the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and shed not innocent blood in this place, neither walk after other gods to your hurt, then will I cause you to dwell in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers, forever and ever. Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit. Will ye steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense unto Baal, and walk after other gods whom ye know not, and come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all these abominations? Is this house which is called by my name become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord." Are we one nation under God? Are we like Shiloh when they refer to themselves as the temple of the Lord are these? Are we a nation under God if we shed innocent blood, commit adultery, walk after other gods, etc.? What will happen to such a nation? Verse 14 of Jeremiah 7, "Therefore will I do unto this house which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave to you and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh." Archaeologists believed for many years that Shiloh never existed because they couldn't find a trace of it. We can believe it existed. The Bible says it existed. But God so utterly destroyed it. For on the one hand saying, the temple of the Lord are these, and on the other hand committing abomination. What happened to Shiloh? 1 Samuel 4, verse 10 and 11 says, "So the Philistines fought, and Israel was defeated, and every man fled to his tent. There was a very great slaughter, and there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Also the ark of God was captured, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died." See here, what happens when people get on the wrong side of God. When they're so prideful of who they are, they allow themselves to sin and still call themselves one nation under God. Saying one nation under God without obeying God will only bring ultimate destruction. Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terror? Lying tongue. Let's take a minute and look at the Supreme Court. Since 1963, the Supreme Court has held that the United States Constitution upholds the idea of a separation of church and state, and that such law prevents such acts as the saying of a prayer in school. The truth of the matter is, no such statement, explicit or implicit, exists within our Constitution. In fact, this statement came from a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist Convention addressing one subject, only their concern over their belief that the United States was about to establish a state-sponsored religion. Jefferson stated that the First Amendment had effectively raised a wall of separation between the church and the state, but only on this issue. They have taken it much further. I asked the attorney who taught my business law class to show me the separation of church and state doctrine in the Constitution. He couldn't do it. But he went on to say, well, in law school, they told us it was in there. Even their application of such a rule is in violation of their own interpretation, because it is acceptable to teach Native American religious practice, Indian mysticism, Islam, secular humanism, evolutionary science, and a variety of other religious ideas in the public school system. Now, brethren, many of you know I've been substitute teaching the last couple of years, and I've spent a great deal of time, especially in the middle schools and high schools, and I can verify that they can teach all kinds of things like this. It's only Christianity that is subject to their interpretation of the Constitution. The U.S. Supreme Court has made similar judgments on such issues as abortion, homosexuality, creation and evolution, and various other moral issues which have little or no basis whatever in the U.S. Constitution. The point is that many of these issues should never get to the Supreme Court, because they have nothing whatsoever to do with the Constitution. One in particular I'll mention, it's not in the slides, is the right to privacy. Brethren, read your Constitution. There's no such right. There's no such right. And you cannot sit back and use that to justify things like abortion and homosexuality. It's not there. They've lied to justify their immoral interpretations. Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terrorism? Hands that shed innocent blood. Who is more innocent than the unborn? Our nation recently celebrated, I use that term loosely, the 30th anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. Another one of those illustrious Supreme Court decisions. The fact is that since the publishing of this decision, nearly 50 million unborn children have been legally aborted in this country alone. And I'm sorry to say that Kansas has been the epicenter of that issue in modern times. Makes you really wonder about that secretary that's sitting in the Oval Office. He used to be the governor of Kansas, Sebelius. This number of children is more than the entire population of California plus the city of New York. How does God view the unborn? Psalm 127:3, lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, And before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. How about Luke 1:41? And it happened when Elizabeth heard the greeting of Mary, that the babe leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. What did God call this fetus? A babe that leaped in her womb. How do we get past what God calls a baby? It's a baby in the womb, just as much as it's a baby after it's born. This is a baby, not a fetus. Roe versus Wade. This is a big lie. One of the problems with the Roe versus Wade decision, it was based on a lie. It was alleged that Norma McCorvey, also known as Jane Roe, and she now publicly admits that she was deceived by her attorneys to state that she was raped. She was never raped. And that's how the issue came to the Supreme Court. And she now wants that decision overturned. It's been contended that the primary reason for allowing abortion is the health of the mother. The reality is, I put 95%, it's probably more than that, of all abortions are performed as a kind of retroactive birth control. Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terrorism? Brethren, we should be outraged. A heart that devises wicked plans. Pornography. Pornography has become the signature problem of our day. Our government is attempting to take some steps to halt this epidemic, but our own court system continues to step in with cries of freedom of speech. What makes this such a poor argument is the fact that there's already legal precedents for inhibiting such practice if it is proven to be harmful to the moral fabric of society. Kind of like the immigration laws. We have them, we just don't enforce them. Freedom of speech does not allow one to cry fire in crowded theaters. But our legal system is allowing pornography to go virtually unchecked based on freedom of speech. Well, many will say, well, I don't look at pornography. Really? I know of many brethren that watch programs like Dances with the Stars. What do they wear on Dances with the Stars? Or, excuse me, what do they don't wear on Dances with the Stars? Whenever things like that even come up, I always usually tell my wife that woman left part of her clothing at home. Many brethren watch soap operas or go to R-rated movies. And they'll tell you that they've gone to them. When I was young, a bare female torso was considered pornography, but today, full frontal nudity is not. Where does it end? Job, I've always been fascinated by this statement from Job. Job says, I made a covenant with my eyes. I made an agreement with my eyes that I'm not going to look. Brethren, do we look? I love the way it was expressed one time. It says, if you're driving down the road and you see an attractive female and you look at her, that's not lust, that's not sin. If you look at her again in the rearview mirror, then you're in the area of sin. It's a natural thing for your eyes to travel in that way because we are built with those kind of things from God. But we need to understand when we cross the line. Virtually every great advance of man has been used for wicked purposes. The printing press. What's the first thing most of us know that was printed on the printing press? The Gutenberg Bible. Well, now it's pornography. The radio was used to preach the gospel, still is. But it's also used to put on profanity. As a matter of fact, they now have a whole new radio system. They went beyond AM and FM, now they have satellite radio. And if you listen to those programs, they'll use all kinds of profanity. The movies, have been very good over the years about at least attempting to portray good values and talk about Jesus and even going back to the Ten Commandments. Well, not so much anymore. One very popular movie that came out about Jesus Christ a few years ago was called The Last Temptation of Christ. And if ever there was a butcher job done in the Bible, that was it. Television. I hate to mention Harold the Truth, but at one time it was a fairly decent program. But now we get to watch Ellen DeGeneres on a real regular basis. It's kind of fascinating. I was reading the Drudge Report last week, and it pointed out the fact that some are suggesting that the recent fall in the Nielsen ratings for the TV show that she's on, the talent show, was because she's gay. Well, go figure. Would some people be upset about watching a lesbian on their TV every day? Let's take it further, brethren. What about we have one in the Supreme Court? The Internet. Almost all preachers here, if not all of you, use some form of the Internet. And the Internet preaches the gospel pretty regularly. But there's a lot of pornography out there. And if you think that it's not available to young people, then you haven't done your research. Most of those things get around the law by simply putting a statement up. You're about ready to enter dangerous territory. Are you 18? Click yes or no. All these honest young people out there are obviously going to click no because they're honest and they don't want to watch pornography, do they? Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terrorism? Feet that are swift in running to evil. This is almost the life of our age. The sodomites are in the land, brethren. And they're gaining ground in so many different ways, it's almost incredible how things have changed in recent days. I feel like sometimes I was born in the wrong era. You know, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and television was, well, Father Knows Best. Leave it to me, we're gonna read. Today, the closest we get to any kind of a family situation is on The Simpsons. Instead, we have 3.5 men. And sometimes you wonder which one's the half. Or was it 2.5? I guess maybe I said it wrong. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. Genesis 13:12. Many of our politicians are pitching their tents toward Sodom in order to gain the vote of the homosexual community. They, like Lot, are merely looking at the greener pastures of the cities of the plain and ignoring the long-term problems that will and are ensuing. We've been told for years that the so-called gay community doesn't have an agenda. That's the devil's lie. Gay marriage, that's an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp, you know. It's an oxymoron. It's already begun in at least 3 states. The wording of the Constitution requires that states recognize the laws of other states. So do we see the implication of that? Do we understand the outcome? The homosexual claim is that of prejudice, yet that's not true at all. Notice that Webster's defines marriage as a union involving a husband and a wife. The homosexual is not barred from having a union involving a husband and a wife, are they? Unless, of course, you change the terms. And that's how they got around the law in California a few years ago. Some, shall we say, overactive filing clerks just scratched out husband and wife and put something else in there. I don't remember what the term was they used. It was some other generic term. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and not Adam and Eve. It's that simple. You tell that as a joke. It's not funny, and I noticed nobody laughed. I wasn't laughing when I put it up here. For man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman. Both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Leviticus 20:13. It's interesting that God calls homosexuality not just a sin, but an abomination. There's no longer a death penalty, but homosexuality is still an abomination to God. I had a running debate in the local newspaper with the head of the Gay Pride Committee of Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. And he really tried to press this issue that he said, well, the word homosexual wasn't even in the Bible until 1947. So I wrote back and I quoted it from Romans chapter 1 and asked him to explain exactly what that means if it does not mean homosexuality. Likewise also the men leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. That's homosexual behavior. No other way to describe it. How should we feel about the homosexual? We get charged all the time with homophobia. In human terms, we need to love the sinner, hate the sin. The argument is made also that, well, you only target the homosexuals. You guys have a one-issue gospel. I explained that very quickly in the same newspaper debate. I said, no, we preach against fornication and adultery. We preach against robbery and covetousness. We preach against murder. But the murderers, the adulterers, and the fornicators aren't marching in my streets. And talking about adultery pride. 1 Corinthians 6, beginning in verse 9, know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves with mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. And such were some of you. Notice that last expression. Were. What do we hear from the gay? Well, pardon me, brethren, I'm not going to use that term anymore. What do we hear from the homosexual? I was born that way. I can't change. God says you can. There's not one scrap of scientific evidence that they are born that way. Even the ones that they've touted have been proven to be wrong. Even the gay community, so-called, are now recanting that position. Gay marriage, did you see the planes crash? Did you see the towers fall? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terrorism? False witness who speaks lies. Well, you know, we've covered that base reasonably well. But our nation's leaders not only lie, they make up excuses to lie. They even have a new term for it, plausible deniability. It's now accepted practice for our leaders to lie. It's winked at by our government and subsequently by our populace. Remember this expression? I did not have sexual relations with that woman. Was he telling the truth? Is he even revealing the truth now? Well, interestingly enough, not according to that woman. What's so telling about the previous issue was the American people's reaction to it. No big deal. No big deal. If one of our leaders shows the rest of our populace what's perfectly acceptable for them to go out and do. It's still accepted practice for political opponents to lie about their rivals. How will God look at such things? Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was spiritual terrorism? And one who sows discord among brethren. I've addressed this once before, and I addressed it on the issue of members of the church, but I'm not going to do that this morning. Because there's a great political divide in this country. Whatever party's in power is found to be at fault for everything that happens on their watch, both internally and externally. And no matter how many months we seem to get away from it, it's all Bush's fault. The rich are played off against the poor, and one party against another, even in this time of war. There have been few times in the past that our country has been more divided than it is right now, and mostly over moral issues. Our government agencies blame one another for every misstep. No one's responsible. Somebody else is at fault. As we look at the deep divide that America is in, what does God see when He looks at us? Is He pleased? Did you see the planes crash? Were you shocked when the towers fell? Were you outraged when you learned it was an act of spiritual terrorism? What can we do about spiritual terrorism? We can cry for the lost souls. Therefore, watch and remember that for 3 years I did not cease to warn everyone night and day with tears. Acts 20, verse 31. We can pray for our country. Many prayers this weekend or this week have been offered on that behalf, and I'm sure they will continue to be offered. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and givings of thanks be made for all men, for kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. 1 Timothy 2, verse 1 and 2. We can prepare for spiritual warfare. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Ephesians 6:13. We can support our leaders in punishing the evildoer and doing right. We can do something no nation in history before us could do. We can vote. We can go to war against evil. How many today, how many gospel preachers in the Lord's church today are willing to do things like John the Baptist did? Stand before the rulers of our age and point the finger at them and say, "Thou art the man," as he did with Herod. Thou therefore endure hardness as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. No man that warreth entangleth himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who hath chosen him to be a soldier. 2 Timothy 2, verse 3 and 4. We can go back to biblical morality. We can teach it. We can show the world what they should be doing, and hope that they do it. I was listening to Brother John last night talk about modesty and preaching those sermons. And it doesn't matter how detailed you get, how many scriptures that you throw out there, invariably there's somebody there in the church that's willing to walk up to you and say, "I don't agree with you, Brother Skip. What do you mean by getting off by telling me what I should and shouldn't dress my daughter in?" One young man even asked me this question. He says, "Is it wrong for me to take my 3 or 4-year-old out at the beach and dressed in beach clothing?" I asked him this question. How would you feel if you knew there was a pedophile on that beach? Boy, that tune changed pretty fast. Brother, there's no question we need to go back to biblical morality. We need to make certain that we start with the church and eliminate those issues that are in the church today. So many that feel like it's perfectly acceptable for them to drink alcohol, or dress in an inappropriate way, or watch R-rated movies, and things of that nature. As long as we're up here preaching general principles, people have no problem with us. But boy, when we get down to their level, and we start identifying the sin, what happens? You went from from preaching to meddling, didn't he? Back to biblical morality, and we need to show a great deal more outrage. Thank you, brother.